everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Daniel is traveling today. He'll be back in the studio in Lake Jackson tomorrow. Today, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the DOD budget, which passed last week. Both the House and the Senate passed the conference report, so it's on the way to the White House, which I'm sure is going to get signed. It's a big bill, the biggest ever, over $700 billion. That budget happens to be equivalent to the top 9 other countries. So we spend a lot of money on the military. It's too bad we don't spend any money on defense, because they call it the DOD budget, the Department of Defense, but it really isn't. There's a lot of money spent, but I never feel safer, nor should the people feel richer because of this. I think a budget like this makes the country poorer. And of course, I think it makes us less safe. It doesn't provide security for us, because so much of the money is spent on mischief, getting involved overseas and causing a lot of people to resent what we're doing. The worst example going on right now is probably Yemen, as we partner with Israel and Saudi Arabia on that mess that we have, what's going on there. But the budget, the conference report passed rather easily. It was 89-9 in the Senate, and in the House it was 350-70. There were 7 of the 70 that voted against it. Most of them were Democrats. There were 7 conservative libertarian Republicans that voted against it. Actually, as bad as that sounds, it's better than it used to be, because for many years being up there, there might have been sometimes 5, sometimes 10, and maybe 15 or 20. So there's more individuals now that are voting against this budget. I'm not sure for the right reason, because sometimes when the far left votes against it, they're probably sincere in that they don't think the war is useful, but it's also, they're not doing it to save the money. It's to try to get that money shifted over to some other welfare liberal program by shifting the funds. But I want to mention a few things in the budget that sort of summarizes where this money goes. For instance, the Pentagon, just to manage the Pentagon, it's $626 billion. So that's the largest lump sum. And nobody knows exactly where that goes. But there's $65 billion for war, and then there's a contingency fund of $8 billion, which Trump says he wants actually more later on. Health care in this budget for the veterans, and health care in the military, mostly the veterans, it's over $50 billion. Of course, that's a real tragedy. We get the troops in there, fight wars are undeclared, and have all the tragic circumstances and consequences. And quite frequently, even with all this $50 billion, they don't get good medical care. That used to be a real chore in the congressional office, trying to get people some medical care. So it's not a lack of money. It's a system that is deeply flawed. Israel's getting over $700 million to beef up their missile system, and that shouldn't surprise anybody. They usually do pretty well. Ukraine is interesting, because we participated in a coup, a couple years ago, and now it is said that Ukraine is under threat of Russia, so we have to give them money. There's a menace out there, and it justifies more military spending, so we're giving them $700 million, but of course the strings are attached to that. They have to buy weapons, from us, so it's all part of the military-industrial complex. And also for that region, the Baltics gets over $100 million, because once again, the Russians are coming, and we have to get them to buy some more equipment too. So it's a lot of that type of activity. The F-35 still gets funded. They're anticipating that long term it's into the trillions of dollars. And interestingly enough, there was strong support from Florida for this. Not that not everybody has endorsed it, right and left, Republicans and Democrats, but just in Florida, there are 18,500 jobs related to the F-35. And even all the mess that has been made, and all the waste and cost overruns, and the plane not doing the job, jobs are important. In that was brought up. It's always brought up on the House floor. You can't stop this. These are jobs. So there's a strong support in Washington for military Keynesianism. Keynesianism, of course, is where governments are supposed to produce the jobs, just spend money and get people doing things that aren't too important. So if you have them building a plane that doesn't work, it doesn't bother a liberal. Some liberals might say, well, it shouldn't be on military, but for the most part, they don't see this in economic terms as being a drain on productive spending. So when you look at all this, if we could get away with a lot less money, $50 to $100 billion in the defense budget, this is money that comes out of the economy. You say, oh no, I mean, how can it come out of the economy? Because they'll just borrow it. And I say it comes out of the middle class mostly, because even though the middle class and the poor don't pay as much taxes as the very wealthy, they suffer the consequences of the borrowing and of the inflation and the cost of living going up and a poor economy and poor jobs. So the Budget Control Act is supposed to regulate this and sequester funds, because if it goes over, well, this is well over the budget authority that permits the spending, because that only allows for $549 billion, so they're over it by $77 billion, but sequestering and restraining doesn't exist. Nobody pays any attention to this, and this will continue. That we accept the whole notion that our government, unfortunately, in its bipartisan support, is that we should be involved around the world. And you know, there's a lot of criticism of the president all the time, and he deserves a lot of it, but isn't it interesting that on one hand, they'll condemn the president and say he needs impeach, and he has an issue like the military spending, and they actually spent more money than the president asked for. They were about 30 or 40 billion dollars more than the president asked for, and yet it's all this conflict, but not with the military spending, not with the military-industrial complex, not with our foreign adventurism. That is very bipartisan in support. They don't criticize Trump for too many wars going on, mainly because the Democrats were pretty good at that as well. You know, it is such a mess, and one thing that I've worked on for many years has been to get the country and the Congress to reveal what was going on with the Federal Reserve, because that is very secret, how they print and create the money and who gets bailed out. And we've had a lot of support over the years and interest in getting an audit of the Fed. We had it passed several times in the House, and that sentiment is still strong with the people. But it's not likely to happen. The Senate never passes. It's going to be a while for that to happen. I'm afraid we'll have a collision on our monetary system before we really find out what is happening. And yet, the Pentagon has never been audited. And interestingly enough, they use the same excuse as the Fed uses for not having the audit, and I think it's hilarious. The Fed says, oh, we can't audit, we can't do an audit because it costs too much money and it takes too much of our time. Wait a minute now, you know, costs too much money? They finance everything else. They're the backup. They have a checking account that never runs out of money, but they don't have enough funds allotted to auditing the Federal Reserve nor the Pentagon. And the Pentagon says the same thing. It costs too much money, and they can't do it. You know, in spite of all these problems, some of the best cheerleaders for this budget, and you have to be suspect on whether the libertarian conservative side has any victories, and that is the McCainites and Graham. They love this bill. But I'm saddened. There's the few Republicans that voted against this were libertarian leaning or libertarian. But, you know, the solid conservatives, they who are pretty good on voting against spending and would like to cut back, they never vote against this. Matter of fact, they're not all that good on what they say. So Republicans are supposed to be conservatives, spending less money and work toward a balanced budget, but it really doesn't happen. And this is where I think the bipartisanship is way too strong. So when the bickering comes, the bickering is real, but the bickering is over who has the power and whose friends get bailed out, and it becomes personality, but not philosophic. They're not talking about this budget in light of an interventionist foreign policy. Maybe we shouldn't be involved so much overseas. That's not part of this discussion. And even on the social side and the welfare side, there's nobody really thinking that, do you think we ought to use the guidelines of the Constitution to only do those things that we're authorized to do, and we don't have authority in the Congress to, you know, take care of all the medical needs of the people and all the educational needs of the people? And this is where the problem is. They endorse big government, and it's done on both sides. You know, there was another interesting thing that was in this budget, and I think that actually even surprised me, and that is that there's a tremendous amount of effort to get more visas. There's going to be 3,500 more visas coming from Afghanistan with this authority. And that's important because of the major crisis in the country and with people coming into the country. But the excuse me, the 3,500 visas is interesting because at the same time we're giving visas to Afghanis who had been in our military. They get to come over and get in front of the line and work towards citizenship. We're sending over, under this bill, 3,500 Americans to join the military forces in Afghanistan to maintain order over there. So, and I think it's also interesting that the anti-immigrant feelings by this administration is very, very strong, and yet there's no problems with 3,500 new visas coming in and coming from Afghanistan. And that doesn't mean that I'm on the side of really, really tough controls on immigration. I just want some controls on it where people don't come over and live off somebody else, and that they have sponsors and this sort of thing. So it's a different system. But these individuals come over and they will be a cost. They will become citizens. People waiting in the lines will be pushed around. And the other thing that I noticed in looking at this is that I was wondering if they're allowing 3,500 just coming from Afghanistan that participated in our military over there. How many people do you think we have, foreigners, in our military right now? Because we invite them to come in. There's 35,000 foreigners that are in our military, and of course they get promised citizenship if they stay in and they're good soldiers and they come back. And even while they're in the service, if they stay in the service, they can become citizens. So this budget doesn't represent any concept of fiscal responsibility. It doesn't represent any effort to maybe talk about policy and why are we spending so much money. It doesn't recognize anything about how powerful the military-industrial complex is, nor does it represent how we distribute this money. The subject of the alliance with Saudi Arabia and what we're doing in Yemen, that doesn't come up as well. So it is a rather sad story that we're going to spend this much money. It's called the defense budget. Has nothing to do with defense. It makes us less safe and secure, and it's going to be very penalizing to our middle class. So in looking at this, the way this money is spent, it's a good time for the American people to say, you know, this is absolutely right. This is way too much, and we're going broke, and we're borrowing this money, and it's just putting a greater burden on the middle class, a greater burden on our economy. Just think of the trillions of dollars being spent in the military. If that money and what we spend overseas, it would be left in our economy, that would go to helping people, But no, people have been indoctrinated by this concept of Keynesian economic planning, and they accept this, and they accept, the whole idea that military Keynesianism creates jobs and that's good for the economy. It's not true. What we need is to have a defense department that defends this country under emergency. But under those estimations, there would be no need to be over $100 billion, and we would be safer. That is what I would advocate, but don't hold your breath. It's not going to happen. This mess is going to continue until both our foreign policy comes back to haunt us and the financial system comes back to haunt us, and the financial system and the dollar hurts us. Then maybe we'll have a chance to reform all this. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.